Hello again, Richard here from WYOY Webcast. In this video we're going to be talking about how the universe exists. I'm going to look at it, I'm going to expand a little bit on my example about water and talk about how that affects time. And it also goes to talk about our interconnectedness at the same time. Okay, so it kind of covers three things, okay? Okay, so again, let's go back to my example of water. So we have got a bowl of water, we take this two-dimensional surface, we lift it up. So if this were to create a waveform, something happens, my existence for one, creates a wave, hits the edge, comes back, and okay, so remember all that from before? If not, go look at the other videos and come back. Okay, so now we understand that whatever it is, whatever action is taking, and even a thought is an action, creates an energy wave of sorts and goes out everywhere in space. Will eventually touch every point of space and time, come back to its source, okay? Along the way it might change a bit, but it will eventually come back. So let's expand on that idea now. So if instead of thinking, again we're going to keep the surface of the water as an example, but now I want you to imagine where you're standing next to a riverbank, okay? And so if you throw a rock in the river, it'll do a waveform action and the wave will go. Now, as the river is flowing, because I said we're next to the river, the wave will still do that, but it'll also move down the river. The pattern will stay a perfect circle as it goes out, but it will follow the flow of the river at the same time, okay? Because in truth, it's not a two-dimensional world we live in, it's three-dimensional. Now when I do the example of the bowl and I tap the surface of the water, the wave should essentially go back and forth forever. It should go back to source, go back to the edges, come back to source. But the reason why it doesn't when you take a real bowl of water is because it's not really a two-dimensional representation, it's actually three-dimensional. When I tap the surface of the water, I'm also affecting the molecules beneath the surface of the water, okay? And I'm also affecting the molecules of air above the surface of the water, because when I create a wave, that wave action there, that wave moving down, it's actually pushing against molecules that are in the air and the water beneath. So because that wave is in part absorbed by the water and the air, eventually the water will become still again, okay? So if I've removed the air in my model and I've removed the water from underneath the surface of the water and just retained the surface of the water as reality, when I tap, the wave should essentially, and it being, if the one tap means it's the only one thing exists in that universe, that wave will go back and forth forever until there's another wave, another tap, another thought, another thing brought into existence. Then that will affect the wave, whatever frequency that is, might absorb the initial wave, my tap and no will affect this new object in some way, depending on its frequency, or not. So the wave, once the wave hits and goes through, some of the wave is retained and bounces and comes back and continues on forever, but some of it is absorbed, reflected, refracted, and eventually thrown back out into the universe, although now it might be a different frequency, okay? So my initial energy that I threw out is never destroyed, but its form might change. The knowledge that it brings as it moves away from this object now has been altered. So if I remain tuned to the basic structure of the energy that I threw out, as it comes back to me, slightly altered, this is where I can gain knowledge, if I'm in tune to it. Do you understand? So the universe works like that right across the board. Okay, so now I'm further detailing what I said in the previous video about our interconnectedness and how each of all of our experiences we teach each other. And this is one way, and this is actual, this is factual. Okay? Now, let's move away from that kind of, sort of, for a minute, and let's go back to the surface of the water on the river. When I was talking about the pattern that is Richard, well, if I do an analogy, if you will, on the riverbank, say the riverbank has a little bit of an inlet, and you've got water flowing, and as the water flows, okay, it might go into the inlet and might create somewhat of a little whirlpool, okay? Well, that whirlpool, that pattern that is maintained, is an analogy of an entity such as myself or yourself, okay? Richard, the pattern of Richard, okay, is maintained because the pattern is being repeated over and over again. Now, I want you to think about this. Water comes in, you've got different molecules, different energy waves coming in, being part of the pattern. Then the water, because it's part of the river, flows out eventually. So the pattern is maintained, but the pattern being Richard is created by energy going in and going out. Remember I said that the body, the cells, they change every 10 years? You're actually a new person. Well, this is kind of like the river analogy of that, but the pattern I'm talking about here is more my soul than my body. But in truth, it also applies to my body. The same thing is happening, but at a different frequency, at a different level of scale, if you will. Okay? So that pattern is maintained, but now to step back, you got to understand something. The pattern that is Richard is still part of the river. I got water going in, spinning around a little bit, maintaining the pattern of Richard. Then eventually some of the molecules goes out, but as some of the molecules go out, I got more molecules coming in, maintaining the pattern of Richard. Okay? But I'm still part of the river. So now, when we look at religion, and I'm going to talk about religion more in the next video, okay? But I just want to talk about, you know how they say that the Holy Trinity? Well, this is the Holy Trinity right there. I am part of the river because I'm a pattern within the river. So I'm a part of it. I'm also apart from the entire river in that I have my own pattern being maintained. And at the same time, I am also the river, which in this case, the river is actually the entirety of the universe, the flow of energy, the flow of time and whatever, in essence, God. So I am a part of God, from God, in that through God's gift, I have my own consciousness, my own pattern, which God wanted, right? God created, God wanted this. So it can learn from this pattern's perspective, and at the same time, this perspective can learn from God, because you've got the energy, the water going in, swimming around, going out. So as energy comes in, I can learn from other patterns that affected the molecules before they come and reach me. Follow me so far? Okay, why am I looking up in space? The camera's right there. I have a dream catcher right there, must be why. So, you get it? So this pattern is maintained, but so I'm a part. Okay, I'm distinct. I have my own power to decide, power to choose within the confines of my own consciousness. But I am also a part of the river, right? Because my pattern exists within that little small embankment of the river. Yet at the same time, I am also the river. I am God. I am apart from God, I am a part of God, and I am God all at the same time. We all are. This is not true just of me, it's true of everyone. Okay? Ooh, there's your Holy Trinity, the real one. Okay? Now, one more step to consider. The river, because remember I said initially everything curves? Well, the river will actually flow around because it's spherical. Okay? And eventually, well, you know the water that came in, swirled around and came out? Any one of those water molecules or pieces of existence will at one point in time, the same way as when I tap the surface of the water in my bowl, right? The wave went out, went to the edges of creation, and bounces back to the source of what created that wave in the first place. Will eventually touch each and every part of existence and come back. This is true of every waveform. Are you following me? I hope so. So, my consciousness is apart from God, a part of God, and also God. But now, take that river now and turn it into a circle, because everything's a waveform. So that means that whatever energy, so my consciousness is here, okay? And I got the water flowing everywhere, all over the world, all over the universe. And any energy from anything, from anywhere, anytime, will touch every other part of existence, time, space, and will eventually come back to where it came from. This is true of all things in the universe. This is how the universe teaches itself, about itself. This is how we learn about ourselves. This is how we learn about the universe. Okay? All these thoughts that came to me, they didn't come to me because I'm smarter than you. They came to me because I tuned my frequencies to understand the knowledge that I'm passing on to you today. Okay? I can pass on my feelings to you as well. Okay? Now, one last thought on interconnectivity. Okay? Let's go back to the water example for a minute. No, actually, let me speak to you about an experiment that was made. Again, you can Google this, okay? YouTube or Google, whatever. Do a search at YouTube or just Google. You'll get to it. Called the Global Consciousness. They're calling it not global consciousness. They did global consciousness experiments. The name of the group was Global Consciousness Foundation, I think it was. Anyway, just Google global consciousness and you will eventually come up to these guys, because they're still out there on YouTube. Now, back in the day, one of the experiments they did, and this foundation was set up, I believe, in the 1995, 1996 time frame, and they said they over the course, and they still exist today. So they were doing setting up different experiments to kind of prove or disprove if such a thing as global consciousness existed, either from a planet point of view, like the Gaia point of view, or from a human interconnectivity point of view. Okay? Now, one of the experiments they did is what I want to talk about, and I will link into what I was just talking about, the river being spherical, waveform, interconnectivity, soul patterns, and all that, and time. So if you were to take the universe and compact it together, then it means that all things, all people, all consciousness, all matter, all everything can be aware of everything else at the same time, including being aware of God, being aware of me. You would be aware of me. There will come a time where you will know everything about me. How I felt, whatever, anything I did in my life, anything I said, this knowledge will come to the consciousness that is you. In time will come to you. Everything that you are in time will come to me. We will come to know one another very intimately, and it's going to be cool. But we're going to be so totally self-aware, but we'll be at the same point. All points of space and time will come together as one. And that's when we will know everything. But the reason why, and this kind of explains why the Big Bang happened, okay? By expanding space and time and all points of space and time, now we have the illusion of, or not the illusion, but time is stretched, which allows us to experience things individually and savor the moments, good, bad, and everything in between. Okay, so I'm kind of throwing another life lesson in there. Okay, but think about it and you know what I just said makes sense. But anyways, I want to come back to the global consciousness experiment, and I want to prove, and the whole idea there is to prove to you how time is not the linear thing we think it is, how it's part of the circle pattern. Okay, and with using the water example that I gave you before, and tying this together, you're going to go, okay, yeah, that does make sense. This again is just for your enlightenment, for you to get it, for you to become a better person, to me, with me, to each other, and so on and so forth. That's the end game here, okay? All right. So now, global consciousness experiment, number whatever, okay? What they did is they put about 75 computers all around the world. The computers had random number selector. They had a little program running that randomly chooses a number every, I don't know, 1 second, 6 seconds, whatever it is, I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But it could only choose a 1 and a 0. So it's kind of think of it as each of the 75 computers are flipping a coin and randomly getting head or tails. Now, if you take a coin, a quarter, and you flip it continuously, say you flip it 100 times, and you take note of how many times you flipped heads and how many times you flipped tails, you'll notice that you're going to be in and around the 50% mark. 50% of the time you would have gone ahead, 50% of the time tails. Okay? So they did 75 computers around the world. It was flipping this coin programmatically, and the results were being sent to a central computer to see if the average of the zeros and the ones being chosen would go in one direction or another. Okay? Thus, kind of insinuating that if an event happened, like say a tsunami in Japan, and affecting the consciousness of a great number of people, could that affect the random number generators sitting on all these 75 computers? Well, the short answer is yes, it did. The numbers were thrown off the 50% average mark repeatedly when big events were happening on Earth. Now, was it because of the electromagnetic affectation of the Earth because of the event? Was that changing the random number selectors, generators, of their outcome? Or was it actual human global consciousness? We're not sure. Okay? But I will explain, there was another experiment done, before I continue with that, there's another experiment done in the 1950s that has been repeated over and over again. And again, this you can research it on the internet, don't take my word for it. And what they were doing is they were throwing patterns, or particles, through a particle accelerator called a cyclotron. And what they were doing is that you had a plate like this, and it had two rectangle slits. So think of it as you're throwing baseballs, a bunch of baseballs. I'm throwing a baseball, a baseball, a baseball. And behind this plate, there was another plate full, recording where the baseballs, when they went through either one of the slits, where they would hit on the other side. As you can imagine, that would create a pattern where you'd have specks where the baseballs hit on the plate in the back, that you kind of have like two ovals where you got pop marks like this, okay? If you do the same experiment with water, where you've got one plate like here and it's got two slits, and you've got another plate in the back, and you create a wave, okay? Well, once it goes through the two slits, you'd have waves of energy the same as when you tap the water. You'd have two waves generated where at one point they would meet, and when one wave meets another wave and they're a perfect match, they actually double in height. If the waves meet and they kind of crisscross each other, then they negate the effect, so you'd have a flat surface, a zero output. And if they meet while on the downside, where the waves meet, you'd have double the depth in the water. Okay? Well, this pattern would generate itself on this back panel, where you'd have the center, like right in the middle between the two slits, you'd have an oval showing really where the waves hit all together, very powerful, and then you'd have slits like this, same ovals, but as you went away from the center, they'd become lighter and lighter in terms of how much energy hit that pattern. So one is a particle pattern, and the other pattern is a waveform pattern, okay? Now, in the 1950s, when they did this experiment, and when they were observing the experiment, they're throwing alpha particles, I think, which is electrons, more or less. Whatever was particle they were throwing, it doesn't really matter. The point is when they were observing the experiment, the results was that of a particle wave. Okay? Just two slits, and that's it. Then at some point in time, because the experiment can be run automatically, they would run the experiment, then they went off to lunch. They did not observe the experiment. Now it's the same thing happening. It's alpha particles being thrown at the two slits, the plate with the two slits, creating a pattern in the back. When they did not observe the experiment, the resulting pattern on the back plate was that of a waveform energy. Okay? A waveform energy pattern versus a particle wave or particle energy pattern. Okay? The same experiment, the same type of particles, the same equipment would have a different outcome if the experiment was being observed versus not being observed. Now, universities have done this repeatedly since that time. Okay? And different people, and they get the same results. And scientists have been scratching their heads on this for a long time. Well, if you go back to my explanation of gravity being a push effect rather than a pull effect, you got to understand that while you're observing the experiment and happening, you are affecting, you're creating a push energy wave, if you will, on the particles or on the wave energy, and because it's not being totally absorbed, partially refracted, deflected, that's where you're getting a spin effect, and you're creating a particle wave or particle a particle pattern and particle energy pattern. Not observing it, you're allowing the spin of things, the wave effect of everything to happen naturally. So then what's being shown now is the wave pattern that it actually is when it's not being observed. What this implies is that by observing things, we affect its reality. Okay? By observing ourselves, we can affect our own reality. Okay? Now you might say, Richard, that's a stretch. It is, but it's also a true stretch. Okay? Now I'm going to finally come back to that those 75 computers. The very best example that they have that human consciousness observing itself can affect reality was at 9/11, when those planes hit the towers. Okay? The whole world stopped and looked and observed what was going on. Well, all of the random number generators went off kilter. They went from 50% to whatever, they spiked up in one direction. And then as the day progressed and the events went on, and oh my God, and whatever goes on, over the course of time, the random number generators went back to flipping heads or tails 50% of the time again. But there was a spike right at 11 o'clock, or when the planes first hit, what was the tap on the water, if you will, okay, it spiked right up. Indirectly proving that human consciousness can affect reality. Now, the last time I Googled this presentation about that, I noticed that they changed, or they weren't quite showing one of the graphs in the same way when I first saw this presentation. And here's the thing: if you can find that graph, if you can find, and I know you can find the presentation about the 75 computers, I know you can do that. Will they show this graph I'm talking to you about? Is another is another matter, because when I saw it the second time, I noticed that they kind of glazed over it, and they didn't spend a lot of time explaining the graph, because I don't think they could explain the graph. I can and I will right now. The graph wasn't going 50%, 50%, 50% heads, tails, and 11 o'clock spike up, and then gradually go down. It started to go up before 11 o'clock, so you had a wave like this. Explain that. Not only that, but the wave going up, going down, it was about an hour shorter, or 3/4 of an hour shorter on this side than it was on that side. So it lasted a little while longer, going back down to normal, and it spiked up, but it wasn't like this, up and down like that. It was like this and like that. Okay. I'm going to throw two things at you. Go back to the riverbank. Go back to where you're throwing that rock in the water, and you're creating a wave going in every direction, but the wave is also moving down a little bit. So the rock is thrown in the water at 11 o'clock, creates a wave pattern, but because there is a time flow, okay, this circle moving down a little bit, well, is the reason why you get a little bit of a shorter wave up than the wave down. So in other words, that was kind of showing you the flow of time that is going on, that we're in a gravity well, so there's a movement of time. We are in a river of energy that flows in and around the universe and comes everywhere all the time. So it kind of proves that. But it also shows something else, is that the emotion, okay, when that first plane hit, I know when I saw that on TV, and I know, oh, what's going on, and you could feel there's something, what's off. Everybody was kind of, oh. Okay, and if you remember that day, everybody felt something weird, and when we're looking at it, I know for myself, I went, oh, boop, this is the start of World War III. So there was a lot of, oh, shit, going on. And I think I wasn't the only one. Everyone in the world, when they saw those planes hit the towers, and we saw that it was not just an accident, it was an act of terrorism and all that, and that entire realization, we were going, oh, right? Do you remember what you felt like that day? Well, everybody felt that way. That's what threw the random number generators off kilt. But here's my point. The graph, like I said, went up before 11 o'clock. What, was everybody having a premonition? No. When it hit, like throwing the rock in the water, the wave goes in every direction, including the past. Time. Emotions can travel through time. If emotions can travel through time, then anything of a waveform pattern, energy, what have you, can travel through time as well. Okay? Now, here, let me give you a daily example, something that can happen in your daily life that proves what I just said. You've all lived it. Okay? You haven't heard from Bob in, let's say for an example, in 10 years. Okay? All of a sudden you're thinking about Bob, and you're saying, oh yeah, I haven't heard from Bob in a long time, and then all of a sudden the phone rings and it's Bob. Okay? Well, here's what happened. When you picked up the phone and you went, Bob, hey, how's it going? Oh wow, I haven't heard talk from you and all that. So you had an emotional outburst, right? Well, 10 minutes, your emotional outburst went forwards and backwards in time. It also went perpendicular to time, anyways, whatever, but it went forwards and backwards in time. So in the 10 minutes before you actually answer the phone, because they're your emotions, because they are you, they are part of you, and the event is near you, you are all already tuned in to the emotions that you're going to have 10 minutes from now. And that is how and why you can sometimes perceive the future. It's not because you're actually seeing the future per se, But the future, the energy wave created in that future event is going backwards in time. And if you're tuned into it, you're starting to pick up on your own emotions that you are sending backwards 10 minutes from now. That's what that global experiment proved, although they don't talk about it because they don't know how to explain it the way I just did. Which is another way again of also, if I further the action, also proves and shows how we are interconnected, not only in the moment of today, but in the moment of forever. All of us. Keep that in mind. Get it? Now go chew on that for a while. We've come to the end of this video, and now you're ready for the next video where I'm talking about religion and why it shouldn't be what it is today and what it should be in relation to everything that I've just talked to you about so far. Richard here from WYOY Webcast. Talk to you later. Bye for now.